What if I told you some of the facts we all learned in school are basically historical fan fiction? From royal PR stunts to lies that went viral before memes existed. Today, we're tearing through 33 of the dumbest, weirdest, and most persistent fake facts in history. Get ready to unlearn some nonsense. 1. Let's start with a big one. The Great Wall of China. You've heard it 1,000 times. It's the only man-made object you can see from the moon. It's an epic thought, a testament to human achievement visible across the cosmos. The only problem? It's a total astronomical lie. You can't see it from the moon. You can't even reliably see it from low Earth orbit with the naked eye. Astronauts have repeatedly confirmed this, saying you have better luck spotting a major highway. Think about it. The wall is incredibly long, but it's only about 20 feet wide. Seeing it from orbit would be like trying to see a single human hair from 2 miles away. The myth was born long before space travel and just sounded too good to fact-check, and it has stuck around like gum on a shoe ever since. 2. The sewer alligators of New York City, a classic piece of urban folklore that just won't flush. The story goes that rich families bought baby alligators as pets, got bored when they grew, and flushed them down the toilet. These resilient reptiles then thrived in the warm, dark sewers, growing into giant blind albino monsters. It's a fantastic horror movie plot, but there's zero evidence it ever happened. What would they even eat down there? An endless supply of lost wedding rings and pizza-loving rats? Despite decades of sanitation workers navigating the labyrinth beneath the city, not a single colony of giant pale gators has ever been discovered. They were probably hoping to find one, just to have a good story to tell at parties. 3. The Illuminati. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, the secret society of global elites pulling the strings from a shadowy boardroom, controlling wars, economies, and maybe even your Wi-Fi signal. It's the ultimate conspiracy theory. Here's the hilarious truth. The Bavarian Illuminati was a real group, and it was a total flop. Founded in 1776, it was a small society of Enlightenment-era intellectuals who wanted to promote reason. They probably spent their secret meetings arguing about Kant over stale crackers. The all-powerful cabal that supposedly rules the world was basically a short-lived, nerdy book club that got busted by the government after about 10 years. They couldn't even organize their way out of Bavaria, let alone run the entire planet. 4. Every March, the world celebrates St. Patrick, the legendary hero who drove all the snakes out of Ireland. It's a story of faith triumphing over evil, a miracle for the ages. Except for one tiny, inconvenient detail. There were never any snakes in post-glacial Ireland to begin with. The island was separated from the mainland by water long before snakes could slither their way over after the Ice Age. The story is a powerful metaphor, a brilliant piece of PR. The snakes were a symbol for the pagan religions that St. Patrick worked to replace with Christianity. He was the ultimate spin doctor, turning a routine missionary assignment into a monster-slaying epic. He didn't drive out literal reptiles. He just performed a very effective and very metaphorical pest control on the local beliefs. 5. Absinthe, the green fairy, the drink of choice for tortured artists and poets, famous for inducing wild, vivid hallucinations and creative frenzies. It was banned for nearly a century because of its supposedly mind-altering properties. This entire reputation is one giant, drunken lie. The myth was fueled by a brilliant smear campaign from the French wine industry, who were losing business to the popular green spirit. It's like the dairy industry inventing a rumor that almond milk makes you grow a tail. Absinthe contains a chemical called thujone, but you would die from alcohol poisoning 10 times over before you felt any psychoactive effects. The artists weren't having profound visions. They were just wasted, probably writing terrible poetry and thinking it was genius. 6. This one is just sad and bizarrely cruel. We've all seen the footage. Hordes of lemmings, seemingly driven by some mysterious, suicidal instinct, marching single file off a cliff and plunging into the sea below. It's become a metaphor for mindless conformity. But lemmings don't actually commit mass suicide. This entire myth was literally manufactured by Disney. For their 1958 nature documentary, White Wilderness, the film crew couldn't get the footage they wanted. So they bought a bunch of lemmings, flew them to a cliff overlooking a river, and then herded them off the edge with brooms. You can almost hear the director yelling, "More despair! I want to see the existential dread in their little rodent eyes." They faked a natural phenomenon by actively pushing animals to their deaths for an Oscar. 7. Prepare to get angry at your jewelry. The belief that diamonds are inherently rare and incredibly valuable is perhaps the most successful marketing lie of all time. Diamonds are not particularly rare. In fact, they are one of the most common gems. Their value was artificially inflated by one company, De Beers. In the 20th century, they established a global monopoly, hoarding diamonds to control the supply and drive up prices. They then hired an advertising agency in the 1940s, which gave us the slogan, "A diamond is forever," and invented the modern tradition of the diamond engagement ring out of thin air. They didn't just sell a product, they sold an idea, and we're all still paying for it. That shiny rock isn't a symbol of eternal love, it's a symbol of marketing genius. 8. Picture Sherlock Holmes, magnifying glass in hand, having just solved an impossibly complex case. He turns to his loyal companion and says the immortal line, "Elementary, my dear Watson." It's the most famous quote associated with the character, and he never ever says it in any of the original stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Holmes says elementary, and he says, "My dear Watson." But the two phrases are never combined. The line was popularized decades later in theatrical plays and early films, becoming so famous that it was retroactively burned into our collective memory. It's the ultimate literary Mandela effect. Conan Doyle probably would have been baffled that his character's most iconic catchphrase was one he never bothered to write. 9. The myth about the Dark Ages is so pervasive that we even use the term to describe a time of supposed ignorance. Central to this is the idea that everyone in the Middle Ages, from peasants to kings, believed the earth was flat. This is a lie invented to make people from the past look stupid. Educated people in the Middle Ages knew the earth was a sphere. They had been reading Greek texts from scholars like Aristotle and Ptolemy for centuries. The real debate wasn't about the shape, but about the size. The whole "Columbus proved the earth was round" narrative was fabricated in the 19th century to paint him as a lone genius fighting against a superstitious, backwards church. In reality, his critics weren't afraid of him sailing off the edge. They were correctly arguing that his math was terrible and the planet was much bigger than he thought. 10. The story of the Titanic is the ultimate tale of human arrogance meeting a very large, very cold iceberg. Central to this legend is the claim that the White Star Line advertised the ship as unsinkable. It's the perfect, ironic setup for a tragedy. But they never actually said that. This powerful label was mostly slapped on by the press after the disaster to make the story more dramatic and sell more newspapers. The company used much safer, lawyer-approved language, like calling the ship practically unsinkable. That's a huge difference. It's the corporate equivalent of saying a phone is water-resistant, not waterproof. The media just dropped the "practically" because "unsinkable ship sinks" is a headline that writes itself, and nobody lets the boring truth get in the way of a fantastic story. 11. Thanks to Hollywood, our image of Cleopatra is of a drop-dead gorgeous Egyptian queen, a siren who seduced powerful Roman men with her otherworldly beauty. Let's correct the record. First, she wasn't Egyptian. She was the last ruler of a Greek dynasty that had been in Egypt for centuries. She was about as Egyptian as a Philly cheesesteak is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Wait, bad example. More importantly, evidence suggests she wasn't a conventional beauty. Coins minted during her reign show a woman with a prominent hooked nose, a sloping forehead, and a sharp chin. Her real superpower wasn't her looks, it was her brain. She spoke multiple languages, was a brilliant political strategist, and had a charisma so powerful it made two of the most influential men in the world risk everything for her. 12. The story is practically a cartoon. Isaac Newton is sitting under a tree, an apple falls, bonks him right on the head, And bing! He instantly understands gravity. It's a simple, perfect origin story for a world-changing idea. But the whole hit on the head part is a later addition to spice things up. Newton himself told the story that he was simply looking out a window when he saw an apple fall from a tree. The sight made him wonder why it fell straight down and not sideways or upwards, which sparked his thinking about a universal force of attraction. The reality is far less slapstick. There was no comical bonk, no ouch, just a quiet moment of observation that led to one of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in history. Turns out, genius is less about getting a concussion and more about just paying attention. 13. The Iron Maiden. It's the stuff of nightmares and heavy metal album covers. A terrifying human-shaped sarcophagus lined with sharp spikes, designed to slowly impale a victim in a medieval dungeon. It's the poster child for medieval brutality, except it's a complete fake. There is zero historical evidence of this device ever being used in the Middle Ages. It was actually fabricated in the late 1700s, likely as a morbid art piece to be displayed in a museum to shock and entertain visitors. It was a macabre prop, the historical equivalent of something you'd find in a cheesy haunted house. The Middle Ages had plenty of genuinely horrific torture methods. They didn't need this over-the-top B-movie contraption that someone just made up for fun centuries later. 14. Ask an American who invented baseball, and you might hear the name Abner Doubleday, a heroic Civil War general who supposedly drew up the rules in a dirt field in Cooperstown, New York. It's a beautiful, all-American origin story, and it's 100% baloney. The myth was created by a special commission in 1907 that was tasked with finding a purely American inventor for the national pastime, specifically to deny its obvious roots in the English game of rounders. They basically just picked a famous dead guy and pinned the whole thing on him. Doubleday himself never mentioned inventing baseball, and his diaries were full of military matters, not thoughts on diamonds and foul lines. America literally invented a fake inventor to win a cultural argument against the British. 15. General Tso's chicken. That sweet, spicy, deep-fried staple of every American Chinese takeout menu. It's supposedly an authentic dish from China's Hunan province, named after a formidable 19th-century military leader. In reality, it's about as authentically Chinese as a cheeseburger. The dish was invented in the 1970s by a chef in New York City who wanted to create something that would appeal to the American palate, which apparently means fry it and cover it in a sweet, gloopy sauce. If you go to Hunan province and ask for General Tso's chicken, you'll just get blank stares. The real General Tso probably spent his life eating simple, regional cuisine, and would be utterly baffled to learn that his legacy in America involves sticky, battered chicken nuggets. 16. The Trojan horse is one of the greatest military tricks in all of history. The Greeks, unable to breach the walls of Troy, build a giant wooden horse, hide soldiers inside, and leave it as a gift. The Trojans, in a shocking lapse of judgment, wheel it inside their city and celebrate, only to be slaughtered in their sleep. It's a brilliant story of cunning over brute force. The only problem? It was almost certainly a metaphor, not a literal horse. Most historians believe the horse was likely a poetic description of a siege engine, like a battering ram, that finally broke through the gates. Or it might have been an earthquake, sent by the horse god Poseidon. The story from the epic poems just sounds way cooler than they broke the door down with a big log. 17. The story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae is the ultimate underdog tale. 300 ripped stoic warriors making a glorious last stand against a million-man Persian army. It's a foundational myth of Western civilization, celebrating sacrifice and defiance. However, the story conveniently leaves out a few key details, namely, the other 7,000 Greeks who were also there. The Spartans weren't alone. They were part of a larger Greek alliance that included thousands of soldiers from Thespiae, Thebes, and other city-states. While the 300 Spartans were undoubtedly the elite core of the defense, they had a massive amount of help. The narrative was later simplified to focus on the Spartans because, let's be honest, 7,300 Greeks fight valiantly just doesn't have the same Hollywood ring to it as 300. 18. In the 1990s, a phenomenon known as the Mozart effect swept the world. The idea was simple and seductive. Playing Mozart's music for your baby would make them smarter. Parents rushed to buy CDs, hoping to turn their toddlers into tiny geniuses. This entire craze was based on a massive misinterpretation of a single, small study from 1993. The study didn't even involve infants. It was conducted on college students. And it only found a temporary 10-minute improvement in their spatial reasoning skills after listening to a Mozart sonata. That's it. There was no evidence of a lasting increase in overall IQ, and it had nothing to do with babies' brain development. From that one flimsy piece of data, a multi-million-dollar industry was born, proving that the fastest way to sell something is to tell parents it will make their kids smarter. 19. In the early 1800s, an inventor named Charles Redheffer wowed America with his incredible creation, a perpetual motion machine. This device, a complex series of gears and weights, could supposedly run forever without any external power source, defying the laws of physics. He charged people $1 to see it, and crowds lined up, convinced they were witnessing a miracle. A skeptical engineer named Robert Fulton inspected the machine in New York and noticed something fishy. The gears were wobbling and the speed was inconsistent, as if it were being cranked by hand. He exposed the fraud by ripping away some wooden boards to reveal the power source. A tired old man in an upstairs room, sitting on a stool, turning a crank with one hand while eating a piece of bread with the other. It wasn't perpetual motion. It was just a low-wage worker. 20. When we think of ancient Greek and Roman art, we picture pristine, elegant white marble statues. The gods and heroes look pure, timeless, and frankly, a little bland. This image is a complete accident of history. In reality, those statues were originally painted in incredibly bright, gaudy, and sometimes clashing colors. We're talking vibrant reds, blues, greens, and yellows covering every inch of them, complete with painted-on irises, eyelashes, and maybe even some tacky bronze accessories. The paint simply wore off over millennia, leaving behind the bare white marble. The Renaissance artists who rediscovered these sculptures assumed they were meant to be monochrome, and the classical white aesthetic was born. The ancients weren't minimalists. They had the color palette of a 1980s music video. 21. Hollywood has given us a very specific image of the American Wild West. A lawless land of constant danger where quick-draw duels in the middle of Main Street were a daily occurrence. Two steely-eyed gunslingers, a dusty road, a tumbleweed, and a clock tower striking noon. It's a fantastic visual, but it's almost entirely fiction. Organized high-noon shootouts were incredibly rare. Most frontier towns were actually pretty strict about gun control, often requiring visitors to check their firearms at the sheriff's office. Violent deaths were more likely to happen in a drunken saloon brawl or a back-alley ambush than in a formal duel. The romanticized image of the gunslinger was largely created by dime novels and later by Hollywood, because it's a lot more exciting than the reality of cattle rustling and property disputes. 22. When you picture a cowboy, you probably imagine a rugged white guy like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood. This image is a classic example of Hollywood whitewashing history. The reality of the American West was far more diverse. Historians estimate that up to 25% of all cowboys during the great cattle drives of the late 19th century were African American. Many were former slaves who possessed incredible skills with horses and cattle, and sought a life of greater freedom on the frontier. Additionally, a huge number of cowboys were Mexican vaqueros, from whom the entire American cowboy tradition, including its terminology, clothing, and techniques, was largely borrowed. The iconic American cowboy wasn't just one color. He was a multicultural figure whose true story has been largely erased from the popular narrative. 23. The story is legendary. As Rome burned in 64 AD, the decadent and cruel Emperor Nero stood on his palace balcony, callously playing his fiddle while his city turned to ash. It's the ultimate image of a leader completely detached from his people's suffering. This is a fantastic piece of slander, but it's factually impossible for two big reasons. First, the fiddle hadn't been invented yet. It wouldn't appear for another 1,000 years. If he played anything, it would have been a lyre, which is far less dramatic. Second, historical accounts from the time, like that of the historian Tacitus, actually placed Nero in Antium, 35 miles away, when the fire broke out. He rushed back to the city to organize relief efforts, using his own funds to provide food and shelter for the homeless. The story was likely propaganda spread by his political enemies. 24. The Middle Ages get a bad rap for being a time of filth and grime, where people lived their entire lives without ever taking a bath. We imagine peasants caked in mud and nobles who just covered up their stench with perfume. While their hygiene standards weren't exactly up to modern-day levels of obsessive cleanliness, this portrayal is a gross exaggeration. People did bathe. Most towns had public bathhouses, and bathing was a common social activity until later outbreaks of plague made people wary of them. People used soap made from animal fat and ash, and they understood the basic concept of washing their hands and face. They weren't showering daily with scented body wash, but they also weren't the walking biohazards we often imagine them to be. 25. We've all heard the grim statistic that the average life expectancy in the Middle Ages was only around 30 years old. This paints a picture of a brutal world where everyone was considered ancient by the time they hit their late 20s. But this number is a classic example of how statistics can lie. The average was dragged down dramatically by an incredibly high infant mortality rate. A huge number of children died before their first birthday from disease or malnutrition. If you managed to survive childhood and make it to your early 20s, your chances of living to a ripe old age of 60 or even 70 were actually pretty good, assuming you didn't get stabbed in a pointless war or die from an infected tooth. The world wasn't full of teenagers having a midlife crisis. It was just a very dangerous place to be a baby. 26. The Spanish Inquisition has a reputation for being the most terrifying and brutal institution in history, synonymous with sadistic torture and mass executions. Say the name, and you immediately picture dungeons, stretching racks, and hooded figures gleefully tormenting their victims. While the Inquisition was certainly a grim and repressive organization, its use of torture has been wildly exaggerated, often by Protestant propaganda from rival nations like England and the Netherlands. In reality, the Inquisition's own rules limited torture sessions and required a doctor to be present. Secular courts of the time were often far more brutal and used torture far more frequently and with much less regulation. It's a strange thing to say, but if you were an accused heretic in the 16th century, you were probably better off being tortured by the church than by the state. 27. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he unleashed not just ancient treasures, but a media frenzy about the curse of the pharaohs. The story goes that anyone who disturbed the boy king's eternal rest was doomed to die a mysterious and horrible death. The legend was kicked into high gear when Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's sponsor, died from an infected mosquito bite a few months later. The newspapers went wild, linking every subsequent death of anyone remotely connected to the dig to the mummy's curse. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's a total fabrication. A study later showed that the expedition members had a perfectly normal mortality rate. Howard Carter himself, the man who literally broke the seal, lived for another 17 years. The curse wasn't real. It was just a fantastic story cooked up by journalists to sell papers. 28. A Message to Garcia is a short essay written in 1899 that became a corporate and military training Bible for over a century. It tells the story of a heroic American soldier who is given a message to deliver to a Cuban revolutionary leader and, without asking a single question, overcomes every obstacle to complete his mission. It was held up as the ultimate parable of initiative and getting the job done. The problem is, the heroic core of the story is mostly made up. The real-life mission was far less dramatic, and the soldier, a lieutenant named Rowan, received plenty of assistance. The essay's author, Elbert Hubbard, wrote the piece in a single hour to promote his magazine and fill empty space. He essentially invented a corporate propaganda tool that lionized unquestioning obedience, and generations of bosses have been handing it out to their employees ever since. 29. The Spanish conquistador Ponce de Leon is forever linked with his obsessive quest for the Fountain of Youth, a mythical spring that could reverse aging. It's a classic story of a fool chasing an impossible dream through the swamps of Florida. But this entire narrative was attached to him after he was already dead. Ponce de Leon's own writings and official reports from his expeditions never once mention a Fountain of Youth. He was in Florida for the same reasons as every other conquistador: to find gold, claim land for Spain, and maybe convert a few natives. The fountain story was added decades later by rival historians who wanted to make him look like a gullible old fool. He was a ruthless colonizer, not a delusional guy looking for a magical spa treatment. 30. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code introduced millions of people to the Priory of Sion, a secret society that has supposedly guarded the bloodline of Jesus Christ for centuries. The book presents it as a real, ancient organization with members like Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci. This is, without a doubt, one of the greatest historical hoaxes of the 20th century. The Priory of Sion was actually invented in 1956, not 1056, 1956. It was created by a French con artist named Pierre Plantard, who desperately wanted to be descended from French royalty. He forged a series of documents, planted them in the French National Library, and tricked a few authors into writing books about his fabricated secret society. It was a complete fantasy that Dan Brown then turned into a global bestseller. 31. The story of William Tell is the national myth of Switzerland. A tyrannical ruler forces the master archer to shoot an apple off his own son's head with a crossbow. Tell makes the incredible shot, but reveals he had a second arrow ready for the tyrant if he had harmed his son, sparking a rebellion that led to Swiss independence. It's a tale of incredible courage and marksmanship, and unfortunately, there is zero evidence that William Tell ever existed. The story is a piece of classic folklore, with similar tales appearing in the legends of other countries like Denmark, long before the Swiss version was written down. It's a powerful founding myth, a great story for national identity, but it's not history. It's the medieval equivalent of a superhero origin story. 32. The Japanese Banzai charge of World War II has been portrayed in countless films and books as a fanatical, almost mindless, suicidal human wave attack. The image is of screaming soldiers, driven by a cult-like devotion, running blindly into machine gun fire. This is a profound misunderstanding of the tactic. A Banzai charge wasn't the first move. It was the absolute last. It was a final, desperate, all-or-nothing assault ordered only when a position was completely hopeless, supplies were gone, and the choice was between being wiped out by artillery or making one final desperate charge against the enemy. It was a tactical decision born of desperation, not just blind fanaticism. It was a way to inflict maximum damage in a situation where death was already certain, a far cry from the irrational death wish it's often made out to be. 33. In movies, a duel is always initiated with a dramatic gesture. A man is insulted, and he angrily throws his glove at the feet of his offender. The glove is picked up, and the duel is on. It's a fantastic piece of cinematic shorthand. In reality, while throwing down a gauntlet was a medieval tradition, by the age of pistol duels in the 18th and 19th centuries, things were far more bureaucratic and far less dramatic. Challenges were issued via formal, politely worded letters delivered by a friend, known as a second. This kicked off a whole series of negotiations between the seconds, who would try to find a peaceful resolution. The duel was an absolute last resort. The process was less about spontaneous acts of passion and more about following a rigid, almost legalistic procedure. It was a deadly affair wrapped in layers of polite paperwork. Turns out, history is basically a group project, where half the team lied and the rest didn't fact-check. So, which of these lies would you keep just because it makes history more fun? Tell us in the comments. And hey, if your brain feels slightly betrayed but very entertained, hit like and subscribe for more unapologetically weird history.